Hi, this is Barry, and welcome to the Simplicity Zen podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to click on subscribe, and you can do the alert as well. Um, Aside from the fact that you can be alerted when there's new episodes, YouTube uses those metrics in deciding how widely to distribute these videos. And so if you could do that, that would really help. Also, if you want to just get alerted in general, when there's new podcasts, you can go to the website, which is simplicityzen.com. So today, my guest is Kellie Garza, who's a Dharma transmitted teacher in the Open Mind Zen School. Professionally, she's a licensed mental health counselor in Florida. Is that right, Florida?
Yes.
Yeah. And has been practicing psychotherapy since 2004. Thank you very much for joining us today, Kellie.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Could you, so right now you see clients professionally, is that correct?
Yeah, I have a private practice in Viera, Florida, which is north of Melbourne.
Mhm. Great. So kind of diving in a little bit to the narrative of your journey, can you tell us a little bit about where you were born, where you grew up, kind of what your family structure was like and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I'm military brat, so I kind of moved all over the place and I actually lived overseas for a little bit. I lived in Greece for 3 years when I was 7 through 9 years old.
Mhm.
Um, and I really, when I became a young adult, I was at this place where I was like, oh, I had this great childhood and everything, was great. And then the more I dug in and the more I got into therapy, I realized, oh man, yeah, there was a lot there that I didn't see and that I need to heal for myself. Um, One of which being my relationship with my mother. She unfortunately has a personality disorder, and throughout my childhood, that caused a lot of problems and issues. I was very much enmeshed with her and had to take care of her and that kind of thing. So I think that obviously I had to do a lot of trauma work on myself for that. And I think that's probably a big reason why I became a therapist and specialize in trauma and doing trauma work with my clients, because I have such a passion for it. I can understand what people go through and with those types of relationships.
Mhm. So you were kind of, when you kind of needed to, tell me if this is correct or not. So perhaps you kind of needed to be a child and taken care of, yet you were kind of, as a child, you're in a role having to take care of your mother, which is maybe you didn't get to, what you needed developmentally for that reason.
Correct. Yeah, I was definitely a parentified child. Uh, and I would say that from probably definitely starting around the age 3, I
Mhm.
really was like playing her therapist and best friend. She would, talk about all of her emotional problems and things with me, and I internalized that it was my job to help fix it or help her. And that was pretty much most of my childhood and even early adulthood until I started realizing, I'm not responsible for her feelings, and this isn't okay, and this is really unhealthy. So through that, my own therapy, I was able to set some boundaries and do some healing on my own.
Did you find that the pattern that you had with your mother played out with other relationships in your life? Did you kind of end up kind of being like a therapist to your friends
Sure.
or
Yeah.
siblings or anything like that?
Yeah, I was always that go-to person for my friends and all of that. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you feel that's just not great for a child at all, or do you think it's a double-edged sword and where maybe it was good that you could be there for people, or it's just not fair to ask that of a child in any context?
Well, it's not fair to have a child feel like, they're made to feel responsible for the parent in any way, shape, or form.
I meant more your peers and friends and stuff like that. Sorry if I wasn't clear.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think probably naturally I've always been that kind of a nurturing person anyways, so that's probably why, it elicited that for me with my mom and that why it played out the way that it did.
Mhm.
And also with my friends. And I always say I was my mom's therapist since I was 3. And I feel like although that it was a trauma for me, I definitely it internalized for me that I wanted to be good at being a good therapist. And so I feel like in a way it was a motivating factor, and I love what I do. I love my field. And so even though it was trauma born,
Mhm.
it's, I made good out of it, basically.
Mhm. So was it a two-parent household? Do you raise
Mhm.
it with, okay. And any siblings?
Yeah, I have a younger sister.
Uh-huh. And did do you think moving around a lot, did that set any seeds that kind of needed resolution, or was it a strength, or both, or?
It was a strength.
Uh-huh.
I love traveling now. I really got a lot out of living in a different culture.
Hmm.
It really helped me change my perspective from this very, I was also a kid too, but
Hmm.
very kind of egotistical way that this is how things go and this is how things are. So to
Hmm.
live in a different country, not speak the language, and feel vulnerable in that way was a great growth experience for me.
Hmm. Did you grow up with any sort of religious context? Were your parents atheists, or like nominal Christians, or serious Christians, or?
Well, my mom, but when she was in her youth, she was a Mormon, but she didn't practice any kind of religion.
Mhm.
In my youth, my dad, Christian, but not really practicing or anything.
Mhm.
I've always been a very spiritual person, so I was really drawn to what I knew, the only religion I really knew, which was Christianity.
Mhm.
And as a teenager, I would go to church on my own, usually 2 or 3 times a week. I was one of
Oh.
those kids that was like, I took my Bible to school and tried to convert everybody, and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. So I what that was my world for a very long time. And then in my, I don't know, I would say my early 20s, I kind of lost that. I kind of was disillusioned with the whole thing. There was just so many things about it that just didn't resonate with me.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just stopped doing the whole church thing and just tried to find spirituality on my own.
Mhm.
Um, I started listening to Deepak Chopra. I read his books and I felt
Mhm.
really like this is speaking to me spiritually. And so then that kind of led me into learning more about Buddhism.
Mhm. Did you so what was there a certain type of Christianity that resonated with you, or did you not even think about
Not
it as sort of?
non-denominational. Yeah, I would just go to the churches where I would actually church hop and go to pastors that actually spoke to me.
Mhm.
And so I didn't really have one church I was, going to consistently, but most of them were non-denominational.
Mhm. So you didn't really kind of get enmeshed into a parish where a sangha, so to speak, for
Mm-mm,
Christianity. Okay.
no.
Would you drag your friends
Oh
to?
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds like you were very much so you believed in Jesus Christ as the Savior and an afterlife and
Hmm.
all that kind of stuff. Did
Hmm.
you um did you ever have experiences, maybe that could be classified as like the Holy Spirit, or I'm always curious,
Hmm.
um, because I just can't relate to faith by itself. I just it's nothing I've ever had. Like,
Yeah.
any motivation I've ever had in Zen is because of things I've experienced or insights I've had that motivated me to keep going. I
Hmm.
kind of I blundered into it accidentally almost. And
Hmm.
so I just can't relate. I just can't understand faith. And so
Hmm.
was yours purely faith, or did you have like experiences that kind of like validated the faith? you know
Um, like I said, from a very young age, I was spiritual. I remember being 5 and just having long talks with God. I would just talk out loud and feel as if I mean, of course, I heard nothing back, but I would just say, whatever I was feeling or thinking or going through. And apparently, I was talking about Jesus since I was 3, which is interesting to me because my household wasn't really religious.
Mhm.
I mean, my parents probably told me a couple, like read me some nighttime stories that had Jesus in it, but
Mhm.
I had just always felt that connection from a very young age.
So just intuitively it just felt real to you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Would you ever feel a sense of presence, or
Hmm.
union, or anything like that?
Yeah, at a very, I would say, superficial level, one of the best things I loved about going to church was singing. I felt that connection when I would sing. My heart would feel swelled with just unconditional eternal love. And I just, that's, in fact, when I stopped going to church, that was the thing I missed the most.
Mhm. I'm absolutely convinced that, I really view human existence through the kind of the lens of evolutionary biology or
Hmm.
evolutionary psychology, probably more appropriately to say. And I'm just, so I think anything that we have that's part of our lives had some sort of, evolutionary benefit or
Hmm.
purpose, and I'm just convinced that, our neural machinery for music and dance and so forth is there because it gives us a sense of, both personal healing and community bonding in a kind of a spiritual slash religious slash kind of ritualistic perspective. And so I think it's no mistake that, singing is so important to,
Hmm.
to Christianity, and even, the all the kind of the rituals and chanting and drumming and stuff in Zen. I think that
Yeah.
all kind of hits at the same kind of just inherent, um, kind of design almost in humans. Do
Yeah.
you agree, or do you think I'm off base, or?
No, I agree. I mean, there's reasons why those rituals get passed down from generation to generation. I remember when I was young, I'm like, why do people do funerals? This is like weird, like they're dead. So,
Mhm,
and now being older and seeing like the reasons for those rituals and why us as humans do these things to help, create that kind of a closure.
mhm,
So I definitely believe that. And plus there's epigenetics, which we know more and more about through psychology, and how with multi-generational trauma, like all of those things that more and more information is coming out around that, supporting what you're saying.
mhm. Interesting. So, by the time you got to college, did you know you wanted to be a therapist at that point? Did you major in psychology?
Oh yeah, I knew from a very young age. I think when I was 12 or 13, I knew I was going to be a therapist. And so I actually was one of the lucky ones, because I know not everyone has that experience, but for me, I knew for sure that's what I was going to do. And when I was 16, I actually got trained to be a volunteer for a crisis hotline. And I
Okay.
volunteered and did that for a while. I mean, that's how serious, I was about it. And I knew that that's what I was going to do. So yeah.
What was that experience like, manning the phones at a crisis hotline? Was that intense?
It was, yeah, I mean, it could be intense at times. Part of the of volunteering is, this was the hardest part for me, was you had a certain on-call time. And I remember one time somebody called at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up and I had to like, act like I knew what I was doing or talking about.
Oh yeah,
But
I'm awake.
yeah, I know. You want to kill yourself? Okay, let's talk about that now. Being silly about it, but I think, just going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think all the training that I already had up until that point, just in my own interpersonal life, and having to be on the spot and having to know what to say or do,
Mhm,
it probably helped prepare me for those kinds of moments.
mhm. Um, so your relationship with Christianity, was it mostly just you felt a sense of, you know, just general spiritual connection, and you wanted to kind of help that? Uh, I feel like my vocabulary was turned off today, but like, um, you kind of want to, kind of help foster that. Did you? And the reason I'm kind of, what I'm getting at here is, I find like different people get into Zen for different reasons. Some do it because just a real stark fear of death, and they want to resolve that. Some people, they're just unhappy and they want to be happy. Some people just want to know the truth. Some people just feel a connection and they have a sense of adventure and want to explore it. Do you think maybe it was like kind of the fourth category for you, or some combination of the four? Or
Well, once I dropped Christianity, I had a lull in not having, like, I felt like a spiritual direction. And I was so busy with graduate school and having kids and all of that, it just went to the way back side. And then I got to a point in my life where I was in a lot of distress.
Mhm,
And I knew, and I was already had done some therapy, but I knew I needed to go back to my spiritual roots. And
mhm,
because I was always drawn to Buddhism, it's just so happened the Open Mind Zen literally was right down the street from my house. So I would pass it all the time. And I'm like, I should give that a shot. Maybe that could be helpful.
mhm,
And when I met the people there, and Roshi Al, I immediately knew this is the place. Like this is the place for me. In fact, I asked, I think, Al 3 times if I could be his student before he finally said yes.
Mhm.
So that's why I was drawn to it, because I was in emotional distress and I knew I needed more than just therapy. I needed a spiritual practice, and that's what Zen became for me. It's been a very spiritual healing journey for me.
Mhm. Um, so Deepak Chopra, that was kind of your first introduction
Yeah.
to kind of Eastern thinking
Hmm.
and so forth.
Yeah. Hmm.
What kind of teachings or messages in those books kind of spoke to you? Does anything stand out that you can remember?
Yeah, I mean, there were several things. I mean, there was one book that he wrote, and I'm going to get the title wrong, but it was about like the evolution of God through humanity, and going back through time, and how humans' perspective of God was as we evolved. And I just thought, like, that makes so much sense to me, and but there was one book that he wrote that really spoke to me, and I can't remember now. It's like the seven something, you know steps or stages or whatever to help you heal and work your life better. And that book really helped me a lot. So I was sold just from his books alone that there's something to this. I was having a lot of anxiety, so I started meditating.
Mhm.
And meditating started to help decrease my anxiety. So I'm like, there's something to this, like these things that I'm doing, or the things that I'm hearing and listening to, is helping. And I basically was like thirsting for more.
Where did you get your meditation techniques? You
I
just kind of
just,
do your own thing, or
yeah, well, I'm a
you knew there was
therapist.
meditation and you're like, I just
Yeah.
need to sit and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I just knew I needed to meditate, because that's one of the healthy coping skills that you can try to help decrease anxiety. So I'm like, I'll give it a try.
did you know about meditation through like spiritual books or through actually your practice, your
You're my
therapy?
practice. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So was that like in a mindfulness context?
Yeah, and that was another reason I think I was drawn to it, because there was so much about Buddhism that as a practice that us as therapists are prescribing to our clients. Try mindfulness, try this. And so I would do, obviously take my own my own advice, and try it. And I'm like, this really works, and I want to get more into it.
Mhm. Did you ever take any of the was it the mindfulness based stress reduction courses? Did you ever do any of
I
those?
didn't take any of those courses, no.
Yeah, okay. Um, so I'm curious. So as a therapist, I think usually you have to take therapy. It sounds like you were in therapy and you have to take it as part of becoming a therapist. I think in most jurisdictions at least. And
Yeah, not all, but yeah.
yeah,
I didn't have to. I did it on my own accord.
yeah. And and you're obviously very aware of and proficient in therapeutic, modalities and ways of viewing a person and so forth. What do you think, like, why was that not enough? Why do you think you needed a spiritual practice as well? Like, what if I'm even if that's true,
Well,
you,
I think it goes back to, just me always being a spiritual person and feeling a hole there.
mhm,
And knowing that in the past it helped me, through when I was, practicing Christianity.
mhm,
And where now this I was identifying more with, and it made more sense to me, it resonated more. So I wanted, I guess I just kind of, it was a conscious thought, but I guess subconsciously I knew I needed another spiritual practice to get that growth that I'm really needing and wanting.
mhm. Do you think that's really individualistic? Some people need that, or do you think there's just something about mindfulness and the transcending of self that kind of could help anyone in a therapeutic situation? Because obviously there's new modalities all the time pop up in therapy that are
Mhm.
really kind of just rebranded Buddhism in a lot of ways, like the commitment theory, whatever,
Mhm.
I can't remember all the names, right? So I mean, I'm really wondering, do you think just traditional talk therapy by itself is good enough for most people, or do you think most people need the transcending aspect of seeing through at least some aspect of self?
Well, so talk therapy is great and wonderful, and I don't want to downplay it too much. But what I've found for myself personally, and also with my clients, is that to get the healing and growth that you need, you really need to use a modality that's going to deal with the subconscious mind and the body.
Hmm.
So I use techniques like EMDR, and also parts work.
Hmm.
So to answer that question, I think people need to do deeper work, especially if there's trauma.
Hmm.
Not everybody wants and or needs to have a spiritual experience. I don't, you can heal just fine without it. But for me personally, I needed it.
Hmm. Um, so you say spiritual experience. Do you think someone needs like a sudden kind of abrupt shift in perspective, or do you think it's something that can happen gradually
Yeah,
over
it can
time?
happen either way.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. And on the topic of trauma, could you, so for people, that's a word that kind of has a colloquial usage and then also a kind of a professional usage. Could you kind of define it professionally? What is trauma?
What is trauma?
Yeah.
Well, there's all kinds of trauma. So there's overt trauma, there's covert trauma,
Hmm.
there's, I mean, there's a wide range. I mean, it could be trauma from childhood. It could be, you could have trauma, you can get into a car accident and have PTSD after that, and need, trauma work for that, where some people can get in a car accident and they don't need it. So um, it's just a wide array of different types of trauma one can have.
Hmm.
And I find childhood trauma is where, like I was saying earlier, you really need that deeper work done,
Hmm.
because it's so embedded in the subconscious and in the body, because trauma gets locked in the body. And
Hmm.
so that's why we could be feeling anxious and we have no clue why. It's
Hmm.
because something in the environment triggered it, and it created anxiety in the body, and the amygdala is going danger, danger,
Hmm.
because it thinks that you're way back there wherever that traumatic event happened, but it's the anxieties here right now.
It's, so there's all these different types of trauma. What do you think they all have in common? Do you think it's the uncontrolled amygdala activation subconsciously, outside of your conscious control? Is that kind of the core
Well, I think
basis of all of them?
it's really how we internalize it. It's not so much the event that happened. It's how we internalized that event. And so if I've internalized that event as, something that got the automatic nervous system activated, that I'm in high danger, then that I'm going to internalize that, and it's probably going to create triggers for me and all kinds of things.
Mhm.
But for some people, kind of go back to the car accident, getting into a car accident wouldn't create that kind of a trauma in somebody else.
Mhm. Um, yeah. Why do you think people, like, let's say there's two people, two similar events. Why do you think one person would develop trauma and another person wouldn't? Or maybe one person would develop severe trauma and someone else a lighter trauma. What variables do you think go into that?
Well, it depends on their past. So if they, if one, let's say person A has
Mhm.
had lots of trauma in their past, they're more susceptible to getting PTSD from that car accident, as opposed to somebody who, let's say, never had, much trauma or any trauma in their life.
Mhm.
They're less likely to internalize it as I'm not safe and I'm not okay, because person A has all these other experiences in their past that were that triggered their body to say, I'm not safe, I'm not okay. And so that loss of control of being in the car accident could trigger all of that past stuff. And now they've got PTSD over the car accident
Mhm.
and have to process it.
Mhm. How much of a continuum is it? Like, so PTSD is a certain set of diagnosable criteria, that you can say, okay, this person has PTSD because of A, B, C, D. There seems to be trauma that exists that doesn't kind of raise to the level of PTSD. I'm saying as a layperson, and I don't really understand the medical perspective on this,
Of
but
traumatic events happening, and it doesn't create PTSD.
yeah, so someone can have trauma that has lasting effects on, negative effects on their life, but it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of PTSD. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And are the treatment modalities the same for all types of trauma, or is it like PTSD, when it's that bad, you need this type of modality, and if your trauma is more, less life altering, maybe you have this different modality, or do all the modalities kind of a similar mechanism?
They're similar, but there are differences.
Mhm.
So like, for, let's say somebody who has what's called developmental trauma, meaning that all
Mhm.
throughout their childhood and different developmental stages, they've had trauma.
Mhm.
And so with that, I would use more like parts work, somatic parts work.
Mhm.
I could use EMDR with that, but I find you really need, because I don't know if I think you did interview Al already. He does a lot of parts work too.
Can you
Um,
define that? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you define what parts work is?
yeah, so what I do is in somatic parts work. I mean, there's different types of parts work. It all is derived pretty much from ego state therapy.
Mhm.
And ego state therapy, it talks about how we all have different kind of ego states. So as an example, when I'm being a mom in my mom ego state, I might talk or say things a certain way that I wouldn't in my wife ego state. I wouldn't,
Mhm.
I would be in a different ego state, and I would talk and say and do things differently with my husband than I would with my kids. So we switch in and out of these different ego states throughout the day. We don't really usually aware of it, but we're doing that.
Mhm.
And so going back to with somatic parts work, so let's say when a traumatic event happens when a child is 5. So the traumatic event happens, and imagine it gets stuck like this in the brain, that specific event.
Mhm.
So no new information gets to it.
Mhm.
So the same feelings and thoughts of being 5 when that event happened gets stuck in time.
Mhm.
And that gets stuck in the body as well.
Mhm.
And so let's say, I see this a lot in couples counseling. And so let's say that let's pick couples counseling. I'll have a couple there, and like they go from like being adults to all of a sudden they're like, well, you just don't care about me, because they start getting into these almost like childlike kinds of ways of thinking and feeling. It's because
Mhm.
whatever the other partner said is activating that stuck 5-year-old that's still feeling and thinking the same way it did when it was 5.
Mhm.
So what we want to do with trauma therapy, which would be like EMDR parts work, we want to get new information to
Mhm.
that stuck part, so that part isn't stuck anymore. And they're not, if a trigger happens, they're not responding from their 5-year-old self, they're responding from their adult self.
So you mentioned that it's somatic. So does that mean it's not so much new thoughts, new concepts, but there's actually some sort of neuroplastic unwinding that happens at a physical level? Is that correct?
Yeah, so yeah, you definitely create new neural networks by doing this type of work. And so what I do with somatic parts work is going back to the body. So like I was saying before about if somebody's feeling anxiety, let's say they're feeling like a tightness in their chest and they don't know why, they're just feeling this.
Mhm.
How you would go through that is you would say, put your attention in that spot. And then if that sensation could talk, what would it say?
Mhm.
And so the first thing that comes is the answer, because the subconscious is going to give you the answer. So it could be, I'm scared. But from
Mhm.
your most adult self, you're like, what? I'm not scared of anything. But you try to just bypass that. And then
Mhm.
the second question is, how old do I feel when I feel that way?
How
And
old? Is
how
that the?
old?
Mhm.
hmm And so the first number that comes is the answer. So let's say it's 5. So now you've got a 5-year-old part of self that is feeling scared and triggered. And then you can do the parts work. So then you imagine your most adult self trying to find out what's making that 5-year-old part of you scared. And
Mhm.
then there's a whole series of stuff that we do to help. So it's a lot of inner child work kind of stuff.
Mhm. What if someone? So, all right. So you've identified the body sensation, and you're able to describe, what is that body sensation saying? I guess
Mm-hmm.
narratively, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and let's say you're able to identify the age of that,
Mm-hmm.
where that's coming from. Is that enough to unwind it, or is there like what happens next, if anything?
Yeah, so there's a whole process that I would go through. So and I teach this with my clients too, because they can do this on their own once they learn the technique. So
Mhm.
whenever they get triggered, they can do this whole process. I actually have a worksheet that outlines all the steps.
Mhm.
So the first thing that you would do in this kind of inner child work is, your most adult self would validate what the 5-year-old is feeling and their experience. And then, once you're done validating them, then the other thing you would do is what you do, orient them to present day. So you would say, do you know that we're in an adult body now?
Hmm.
And, and then you talk about all the advantages of being in an adult body. Like, hey, did you know that we can drive now? And you know what, we don't have to be around that person anymore. In fact, they're not even in our life anymore. So you
Hmm.
kind of like what I call give them the good news, because again, that stuck ego state, no new information has been getting to it. So
Hmm.
now that you have direct access to that ego state, you're giving this ego state, or this 5-year-old part of self, however you want to put it, new information. It's like, oh my gosh, the trauma's over. Like, oh,
Hmm.
great. And then you go and you take them to safe place. And that usually, once you do all those steps,
Hmm.
it produces so much relief for the person, because they didn't even, first of all, know why they were experiencing anxiety to begin with. And now they know, and now they've been able to work through it and do that deeper work.
Interesting. The reason I'm kind of diving into this in a Zen podcast is the parallels of, to Zen, how kind of Zen works under hood, like really are really striking to me. Like,
Oh yeah.
because like I've never been introduced to a Zen idea that by itself, or any idea of any sort, Buddhism or not, that really seemed to make a difference in my life. Like
Mhm.
someone could be like, there is no self, or you should be a good person, or don't live in the past, don't worry too much. Like hearing these ideas don't do anything for me, and I doubt I'm that unique in that respect.
No, you're not.
However, when through mostly zazen, but also I think through something like skillful direct pointing from teachers and stuff, um, you know, there seems to be a body shift where like for lack of a better word, somatically something's unlocked.
Yeah.
And it seems, and even and there isn't always like the hold were you, or there isn't always like a sense of where this came from, right?
Hmm.
But clearly something physically is happening, not mentally, and I think the mental physical divide's a little bit arbitrary and ultimately not true.
Hmm.
But from a experiential perspective, I think there's a difference.
Hmm.
And it just almost blows my mind the parallel between this kind of unwinding of a traumatic experience and kind of what happens underneath the hood in Zen. Just because it's because one way or another, in life, whether it's trauma or maybe stuff that doesn't rise to that level, the problem is that things are happening we just have no control over, and just kind of happen automatically. And I think through bringing our perspective to the moment and making it physical, it really seems to fix almost everything. And it seems like you're doing exactly that with your practice. So could you talk a little bit about those parallels there?
Oh yeah, there are so many parallels to psychology and Buddhism, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. And I also personally have had, great healing experiences physically, mentally, emotionally through the somatic work I was talking to you about, but also through meditations, like you're saying, like shifts that you can feel within your body. Also to Alda's breath work.
Mm-hmm.
And was very much a whole lot of spiritual healing happened to me there. But going back to what you were saying, body shifts, that I could actually feel my automatic nervous system, kind of resetting itself and releasing some stuff. And yeah, there's just so many parallels, but definitely the physical letting go, I've definitely experienced with a lot of meditation practices and breath work that I've done with Al.
Mm-hmm. Um, so what came first? Were you already working on the somatic trauma stuff and then discovered Zen, or did you discover Zen, which kind of motivated you to do the somatic trauma work?
Yeah, so I first was doing Zen stuff and was, having some of the experiences that I was talking with you about. And I also, both clinically and also personally, was attracted to parts work. I One of the things I specialize in working with is people that have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder,
Mm-hmm.
which is you're doing a lot of parts work. So I was clinically attracted to that, but also too, in doing voice dialogue work with Al, I realized how powerful that was for me. So that was what made me attract to learning more about doing that.
Interesting. There's that book, The Body Keeps Score. Is that, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
What's that guy's name?
Richard Van, I can always never remember how to say his last name, but Vanderkock or something like that.
Uh, I have it on my bookshelf, but I can't see it from here. Anyway, does the work he does, is it similar to this parts work, or is that a different modality altogether, if you know about it?
Yeah, I did read most of his book. What he's more into, like the research stuff of like what helps. And there is a lot of his work that is, very good in terms of he does things I would call more clinical with research. But yeah, a lot of what he's saying is definitely kind of what I'm talking about is how trauma does it gets stored in the body. And if you don't find ways to release it, like he'll talk about things like yoga and things like that that will help with that. And that's one of the things I try to go over everything with my clients, because there's what might work for one person isn't going to work for another person. I don't, somebody does yoga and that releases their trauma, and somebody else, it does absolutely nothing for them. So I always encourage them to try lots of different things.
Mm-hmm. Um, so going back to the modalities you use, one of the stages was identifying the age that kind of initiated the trauma ball or whatever was in our
Mhm.
psyche. What if you can't identify that? What if there's even a repressed memory, or you just don't remember, or maybe it was so many gradual things together that kind of added up? Or do you think it's always a discrete event that's identifiable? Are there ever times where they seem to have all the symptoms of trauma, but you can't really identify the source of it?
Yeah, sometimes that can happen, and for the reasons why you said, so it can be very repressed.
Hmm.
I've had people who've come to me for therapy that they're in their 30s or 40s, and all of a sudden these memories are coming and they were suppressed for that long. So, and I'm sure before they came to therapy they were displaying anxiety and depression and all kinds of stuff and not knowing where it was coming from.
Hmm. And what happens if you can't identify it? Does the approach still work, or do you just have to try something? Or
I
is it
try.
enough to say, like, this is in the past, however it was there, it's not happening now? Is that enough, or do you actually need to know the event?
It helps if you know the event, but you don't always have to know the event. As long as you can feel it in the body, whatever. You don't even really need to know what it was, but if you can conjure it up in your body where it's stored, you can
Mhm.
work with it, which is why breath work works. It's why any of those kind of energetic types of therapies can work. Even EMDR can be very much that way. So you don't have to necessarily know what it was. You just have to be able to pull it up within your body, and because your body remembers it and you can process it through that way.
I want to talk a little bit about maybe the difference between acceptance and healing, or spirituality and healing. For myself, I have a very specific, I don't have like generalized social anxiety, but there are some very specific scenarios where clearly there must be some sort of trauma. Actually, I think I know what it's from, where I kind of get social anxiety. Like through 99% of my day, I don't have that, and I'm fine dealing with people. But there's like some very specific scenarios where it comes on really intensely.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot, you know, for decades now, I've been doing, Zen practice. I kind of took a break when I had young kids, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of Zen practice, and I always kind of felt like a failure as a Zen student because it wasn't touching that. I always thought, I'll get to the point in my practice where that won't be a problem anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 5 years ago or so, um, it's kind of weird how it came apart. I was like kind of doing work practice at a session in a monastery,
Mm-hmm.
and I hate doing work practice and during sessions. I hate stopping the retreat to like work. I mean, I feel like it like kind of snaps me out of it, and I know.
Yeah.
But then I would think like, no, that's a horrible way to be viewing this. You should be taking everything as it comes. And so, but it dawned on me, as I was kind of sitting there like pulling the leaves out of the bushes, which was my job,
Mm-hmm.
that the problem wasn't that I hated doing work practice. It was a problem that I hated doing work practice.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had this vision of how I should be, and I wasn't being that. And that's kind of where the suffering was coming from, that I wasn't meeting my criteria of what I defined as a successful Zen student. And then it kind of and I'm kind of describing this in terms of like thoughts, but it was really more like just like seeing a new color. It was just like a perspective change, you know?
Yeah.
And then it dawned on me that it was the same thing kind of for like the context specific social anxiety. Like, you know, I don't even know how to say it. Like, instead of like trying to fix that and thinking like my Zen practice needed to fix that to be successful, I thought like, you know what, that's just who I am. You know what I mean? Like, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then ironically, that's kind of fixed it in a way, you know what I mean? Because like I was more afraid of getting in that situation than really what the situation was, how bad it was in itself, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that I kind of like, I guess somatically kind of came to just accept that as part of who I am and not even seeing it as something needing to fix, that brought a tremendous amount of peace that I didn't have previously. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, and I'm sorry for this really long,
Oh, you're good.
dialogue, like to get to my point, but here's my point. Is so what I kind of got from there was there seems to be a difference between healing, right? So healing, I think, in my case, would be unwinding whatever neurobiological um, conditioning I had there and not getting, stressed in certain social situations. But more from a practice perspective, I kind of had a perception switch where I just thought, that's who I am, and I'm not going to fight it. That's how I'm feeling at that moment, and it's really perfect if I let it be itself, and so it kind of seems like a different way of viewing, you know, kind of a path, so to speak. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, a lot that you said spoke to me. One of the things, so I'm an experiential learner,
Hmm.
and I think that's another reason why Zen has been so great for me.
Hmm.
And you reminded me of a retreat that I was at, and really for like the first couple of days of it, I was really suffering, for lack of a better word. I was like, I was like resisting everything basically that was happening. I was like, why do I have to get up at 6 a.m? And like, like there's like all these things that kept coming up that, weren't within my control. And like, kind of like you were saying, it's like, well, no, I have to be the good Zen student, and I have to go and be there at 6 o'clock and do all these things. And like, there's just many different things that were going on. And I was, at one point, I was about to meditate, and I looked at my Rakasu,
Hmm.
and it was in my Dharma name was facing up, and I was like doing this number, like just really like suffering.
Hmm.
And like almost wishing that the Zen retreat was over, because I was like fighting within myself. And I looked at it, and it's in my Dharma name means manifesting nirvana. And it was like I had this moment like this, and I was like, well, I'm certainly not manifesting nirvana right now. And then I said to myself, why? And like and then in that meditation, it dawned on me that I was creating my own suffering by wanting it to be different than what it was.
Hmm.
And that if I just surrendered to what is,
Hmm.
then that's where the suffering can go away. And it did, and the rest of the treat was great. But it was that kind of moment. But I think it was, again, that experiential learning that Zen is so good with, and koans kind of talk about, where you're not just answering a koan, you're having to, physically express the koan, embody the koan.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that your story reminded me of that.
So, but thank you. How does that, is the healing of trauma basically that, or are they just different things? If that makes sense, you know what I mean?
I would say that, yeah,
Where do you draw the line between acceptance and healing? Is there, or is all healing acceptance, or are they different things? Does that make sense?
yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, so that, and for me, I mean, that was acceptance, which is different than healing.
Hmm. Okay. So you can heal and you can accept. Maybe you can do both, but
Mhm.
they're both valid, different approaches.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, do you like in your professional work, is it ever acceptance or is it always healing?
Both. It's
Oh, both.
both. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Thanks. Appreciate the deep dive on that. That's
Yeah.
something I was always curious about. Um, so kind of back to your kind of Zen career, so to speak. So you wandered by you saw a sign that says, Zen Center, come get
Hmm.
enlightened or whatever. I'm
Hmm.
just joking. I didn't say that, but but you're like, oh, a Zen center. I've heard about Buddhism and I'm interested and I've meditated. So you walked in.
Mhm.
Um, like, could you kind of take us to that moment? Like, what was your experience seeing Zen for the first time? Like,
Yeah, I was pretty nervous, but very, very willing. I mean, I was like, I need something and I need it fast. So
mhm,
I don't know if you know Dave Vidito, I can never say his name right. But he was the one that welcomed me. And actually, Al wasn't there at the time. And he just had this really, really warm presence about him and very welcoming. And he introduced me to, like what to do. So I didn't feel odd or weird, not knowing what to do. And
mhm,
he just really made me feel at ease. And I really thank Dave to this day for that, because I knew I needed a safe place, and
mhm,
they very much created that there. So I felt very welcome from day one.
mhm. And so you just started coming weekly to the sittings, or was it daily, or what kind of what was the schedule like?
Yeah, so I would go on Sundays, and I would, meditate, and I would listen to the Dharma talks. And I remember just feeling like a sponge, just soaking in all of the Dharma talks, and really helped me a lot in developing some better coping skills, spiritual coping skills, to deal with the stress of my life at the time.
Mhm. And the meditating they had you do, was it different than what you'd been doing on your own? Were the techniques similar?
No, yeah, it was very similar. Yeah, so that wasn't too foreign for me.
Mhm. And did you meet Rochiel pretty quickly and start working with him, or okay?
Yeah, it was. I would say I went like two or 3 weeks. Like I said, I was like, can I be your student now? Can I be your student now? Because I was just so like, I want to be a student now. And his thing is, just give it a minute and see if this resonates for you. And then eventually he sat down with me and gave me orientation for the practice.
Mhm. And so to meet with him in Dokusan, do you need to be a student, or can you kind of like informally have Dokusan prior to that?
Yeah, I mean, you could, yeah, but I mean, he does it mostly with his students.
Uh-huh. And once you became a student, was there a ceremony, or is it like fist bump? All right, you're my student, or was there any sort of ceremony or?
No,
Yeah.
I just became a student and started doing koan work with him, meeting with him weekly.
Mhm,
And that I was a little nervous about doing, because when I first heard of koans, I was like, oh, I'm not good with riddles. And he's like, it's not a riddle.
mhm,
And because I am such an experiential learner, it actually really helped my practice a lot. I'm so glad I did do koan practice.
mhm. Can you describe a little bit what the experience of doing koans is like for you?
Yeah, it really helped me to embody, not just intellectually talk about, but to really embody concepts that, like non-duality, and and embodying what is being talked about in the actual koan.
Mhm,
That So I'm very, you could probably tell about how animated I am when I talk, but I really dive deep into those koans, because I really embody it, and I'll physically express it in a way that really helps me to understand it at a deeper level than not just an intellectual way.
mhm. And did you find that as you kind of went through the koans, did you feel your experience of them changed, or especially as you went through like different phases of it? There's the miscellaneous koans,
Hmm.
and then there's the book of the Gateless Gate and
Hmm.
Lucifer. Did you find that the experience was pretty static as you went through, or as you went through different stages, did it feel differently, or did the koans work differently for you, or?
No, not really. For me, I mean, I love doing koan work.
Mhm,
And so from, one set of koans to the next felt pretty seamless to me. I didn't feel that they were too much different. At least for me, it didn't feel that way.
mhm. And do you feel like you kind of got more out of the koans that you had to struggle with, or the ones that just kind of instantly snapped into place, or do you think it's just a mix?
I think it's just a mix.
Mhm,
Yeah, I would say it's a mix. I wouldn't say that one created more learning or awakening than the other.
mhm. Great. So you eventually got Jukai, is that correct?
Mhm.
Mhm. What is that something that just everyone eventually does, or did you have to ask for it, or what, like how did that come about?
It's a choice. So if
Mhm,
somebody decides that they want to take the precepts, then you would go through that process, and I did. I knew fairly quickly. I would say within the first couple years, the first 2 or 3 years, that this because I felt so akin to this practice, I knew I wasn't going to stop doing the practice at any point. So I wanted to progress and commit more as it went on, so that I could also grow spiritually in that way. So I knew that that was going to be a process for me at some point. I was going to do, and then when I felt like it was the right time, then I took the precepts.
Hmm. Did you? What was that process like? Did you study the precepts? Did you go through them with your teacher? You know, was there a group meeting? You know, what was the actual preparation for Jukai for you?
So you have to make your own rakusu.
Hmm.
Thank God I took home ec and know a little bit of sewing.
Hmm.
So that was a process in and of itself, because it wasn't that easy to make a rakusu. And I was, at the time, I was really busy, working full time and taking my son and daughter to practices. And so I would be literally out on the baseball field sewing this rakusu.
Hmm. Who,
So
who
anyway,
actually taught you? Was it someone at the Sangha, or is it online instructions, or like how
the
did you learn to do it?
Oh yeah. Actually, Al had some papers on how to do it, and I also did look online when I had needed some help. But he had some paperwork that was a good guide for it. And then once I was done with that, then I gave it to him, and then we had the ceremony, and he put my Dharma name on there, and the ceremony was at in the Zen Center with the Sangha, and that felt. I think that's when I really felt like this is my family. This is where I really belong.
Hmm. Did you uh I'm I asked this question, I don't remember if you answered it. I'm sorry. Did you guys have did you go through the each precept individually, like kind of study it on your own or with a teacher? No. Like so there was
No.
no like precept study or precept preparation or anything like that.
No, he gave me what the precepts were and what I was going to be, saying that I was going to, saying yes to all these precepts. So I knew what those were ahead of time, but there was no study of it of any kind.
Hmm. Um, did so once you went through the ceremony, did the precepts take on a different meaning for you? Did you actually
Mhm.
think about them in daily life? Did it affect your practice or your interactions with others?
It definitely deepened my practice, because it was more of a commitment, to not just what I was doing for myself, because I went there for me to heal me, and then it became, it's not just about me. It's about how my practice can also help other people, my sangha, and then clients, and all of that. And so it really helped expand it out from it just being about healing myself to um, trying to do my best to help others.
Mhm. Um, so when you when you got Dharma transmission, was that did you see that coming, or did you? I mean, did you think like, oh, I'd like to be a Zen teacher, or were you asked, or kind of how did that kind of sociologically come about?
Uh, so what Al usually does is he will tell us, his students, a year before he plans on giving us, whether it's Dharma transmission or making us an assistant teacher or whatever. He'll let us know that, and then which is really great that he does that, because you have that year to really sit with that. Like, what would that mean for me to be an assistant teacher, or what would that mean for me to be a sensei? Am I ready for this? What additional pressures might I put on myself with that title? So having that year of thinking about it and sitting with it prior is very helpful. It helped me prepare for that moment
Hmm.
when I did get Dharma transmission,
Hmm.
and it just felt right at the time
Hmm.
that my teacher and I, Al and I have a really good relationship. It's been a very healing relationship for me. Um, One of my triggers was older white men.
Hmm.
And so I was an older white man.
Hmm.
So by him being kind and loving and helping me through this whole process, it really healed that for me. And so when Dharma transmission happened from him to me, and I just felt this natural connection with him anyway. So it was almost like kind of solidifying that.
When you were made an assistant teacher, did you immediately start doing koan work with students, like guiding people through koans? How did that work?
No, I didn't start doing that as an assistant teacher. However, I could have, but I didn't. We just had a ceremony and I was already teaching anyways, but he wanted to officially make me an assistant teacher.
I see. So so maybe the change was is you were giving Dharma talks as an assistant teacher as opposed to just kind of informal Dharma talks.
Mhm.
Um, do you now that you're transmitted, do you have Kwan students, or are you mostly focusing on your professional practice and Dharma talks and stuff?
Well, yes. So I do have a student, and the thing that I've been currently working on is writing a memoir
Mhm.
about my journey to hopefully help other people that have similar journeys to help them along the way as well.
Mhm. That's great. I mean, the reason I think I've said this before, but the reason I do these interviews at all is, as part of my, priest training, I'm supposed to do some sort of, Dharma service. And for some people, it's starting a sitting group, which I do also. But um, looking back at my own history, absolutely what got me into practice wasn't like reading like dry Dharma talks and all that kind of stuff. It was hearing other people's stories.
Yeah.
Maybe they were apocryphal stories in some cases, but actually hearing what practice was like for people and what their paths were like. Whether it be like the biographies of Bankai or Hakuin or Dogen, or more recent stuff like the Nine-Headed Dragon River by Matheson, or there's lots of memoirs out there,
Mhm.
and like that's what got me to practice. Like that it showed me what Zen practice was like. And especially the ones that talked about the internal state of the person as they went through. And I can't be the only one. So like I really wanted. That's why I do these interviews. Is like I think that narrative, the narrative story of so much practice. I think it can be highly motivating to people. So I'm happy to hear you're working on that memoir. Um, did so will that be published like on Amazon and stuff like that?
I definitely plan on publishing it.
Mhm,
So yeah, I'll let you know when that happens.
mhm. Great. Anything? We're kind of nearing an hour here. Do you want to? Is there anything else you'd like to talk about, or maybe some um, like aspects of Zen you'd want people to hear about, or anything like that?
Well, I guess the last thing I would say, and I think it's the thing that really, coming from the Christian background that I did, that I really loved about Zen, even though I was like full wanting to go in and learn about it, there was still that part of me that was, hesitant from, my past religious experience. And what I loved that I would say is that, you don't, there's no doctrine here for you to believe or get or anything.
Mhm,
Here's some things that we're talking about in teachings. See how they work for you. See what
mhm,
they do for you. You experience it and see, is that true or is that not true? There's no person out here telling me this and this and that and that. It's, I get to try the koan on, or I get to try this practice and see, is this working for me? Does this feel true for me? And then
mhm,
I got to determine that. And it wasn't
mhm,
something I had to believe or something I had to do or something. I felt there was more agency there for me. And so I think that helped me also to um, be more open to this process in general. So,
mhm. Okay. Would you consider Zen a religion, or is your relationship to it religious?
hmm, that's a good question. No, I don't think so. I
Mhm,
mean, no, I don't. I, yeah, no, the answer is no. That's a good question. I would say for me, because it has helped my spiritual path and journey, that it's spiritual to me. I know that's not that way for everybody, but
mhm,
personally, that's what it has been for me.
mhm. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of a personal question, so you don't have to answer. But I mean, what is your sense? So, as a Christian, you believe in a greater being, or maybe more abstractly, some sort of unifying force. As a senior Zen practitioner, and so it has been through the rigmarole. Like, what is your sense? Do you feel like there's a greater being? And if so, what do you think the relationship of that is to, or a greater force, or a unifying force? What would be your relationship of that understanding to Zen, if in?
Yeah, so I feel like, and I've had this comes from my some really deep spiritual breath work and also meditations that I've done, being in that feeling that, you know, we're all interconnected. I'm thinking of like Indra's net, and not just, again, intellectually thinking it, but actually feeling it, feeling the interconnectedness. And so I think that there's something, I don't know what it is, that is outside of just me that makes me connected. And it's not just, as we say, I'm not just this bag of skin, but there's something in me that's interconnected to everyone else, and we're all one. So whatever that means, I don't know, but that's what I felt in so many deep spiritual practices I've done with Zen.
Do you think koan works kind of help nurture that feeling, or do you think those are, or they're separate?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, especially with the koans dealing with non-duality, I really struggled with that a lot. And caused a lot of suffering for myself. And so by practicing the koan work and being in that non-dualistic place is a big part of, that's where that, for me, that Indra's net is, and that sensation is of being interconnected to all things.
Um, so if someone wanted to get in touch with you or work with you or just chat with you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, they could email me. I have two different emails. I'll just give you it's Irish Kellie, Kellie, 1978 @gmail.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for the time. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
All
Okay. All right. Have a great day.
right,
Thank
you
you.
too. Take care. Bye.